This letter was an obvious exercise in damage control, and anyone who's, on the, anti-Zionist side who believes that that letter shows that Charlie Kirk was just this pro-Israel fanatic is playing Netanyahu's game. But if you look at the letter, the contents are much more complex. So Netanyahu could not credibly claim Charlie Kirk's legacy as he was shifting.
Max Blumenthal just exposed the truth regarding Charlie Kirk's letter to Benjamin Netanyahu that recently got released and unveiled to the public. What does this say about Charlie Kirk's thoughts about Israel in his final days and possible Israeli culpability in his death? Max breaks this down, and this is the guy that broke this story in the first place on the Gray Zone. So let's get his take on it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
How do you see the whole situation with Charlie Kirk and Israel, Max?
I mean, it's a bigger discussion about the American public in Israel and the complete collapse of American support. And so there was this letter that Netanyahu initially presented when he wanted to claim the legacy of Charlie Kirk, but he didn't release the full letter and just said, Charlie sent me a letter and it outlines his love for Israel, and I invited him come to Israel 2 weeks before his death. Netanyahu didn't say if Charlie Kirk had agreed to come to Israel. He didn't explain what the contents were. And so Candace Owens has been demanding that he release the full letter. And I did so as well on the show of Charlie Kirk's friend, Matt Gaetz, who also is very uncomfortable with the special relationship in which Israel dominates American affairs in the region and basically bosses around the president and Congress. This is a former member of Congress. So Netanyahu does, soon after that, or someone close to Netanyahu releases this letter. It was obviously an exercise in damage control. And the letter is a digital reproduction of something. It's undated. And what it contains is more complex than the way some who have either deliberately attempted to spin it to make Charlie Kirk seem like this diehard, dyed-in-the-wool, ride-or-die Israel supporter, or though, like for example, Bill Ackman promoted that letter, as well as the New York Post. Bill Ackman, the billionaire Netanyahu cutout, who I exposed for hosting this secret pro-Israel influencer summit with Charlie Kirk back in August. So he was determined to show that Charlie Kirk was on board with Israel. And so too was the New York Post, which is a vehicle for Netanyahu's propaganda machine.
Yeah, this is a fair assessment. I largely agree with Max. Just one thing I want to add, though, is in this article, it does say that this is a May 2nd missive. Max is right. The letter itself is not dated. It doesn't say May 2nd on this letter. I also think it might be a slight assumption to consider that, this was obtained by the New York Post from Netanyahu. That's very possible. The New York Post is a mouthpiece for Zionism and Netanyahu in the U.S. to some extent. But at the same time, they could have retrieved this from Turning Point USA, possibly. They don't say that in the article. But yeah, Netanyahu twisted this from the beginning, taking out this sentence and essentially ignoring the rest. Everything written here is from a place of deep love for Israel. So Netanyahu mentioned, hey, Charlie Kirk wrote of his deep love for Israel in the last letter he sent to me. And Max is right. He omits everything else that would have been salacious about this, including the fact that Charlie was asking how to answer these things he was hearing from young people, that Israel's an apartheid state. Why does Israel conduct ethnic cleansing? Defending Israel's not in the U.S. national interest. And Max is right, too. He doesn't say whether or not Charlie Kirk denied or accepted a trip to Israel. He just said, well, I'm sorry that can't happen. So I think Max is right on this assessment. And there's a battle for Charlie Kirk's legacy, and the Zionists are trying to twist it in their direction. And some people saying that, this is indicative of a total shift away from Israel on the other side are using the letter for the same purposes. I have a more nuanced view of this.
But if you look at the letter, the contents are much more complex. I mean, and you can see Charlie Kirk doesn't understand the position he's in as a Israeli subcontractor. And he's asking Netanyahu and Israel to do the work of Israeli propaganda in the US rather than contract out to all of these highly influential Gentiles. He doesn't get how it works. The other thing is the letter supposedly was dated in May. And it's almost like it felt like light years away from where Charlie Kirk wound up in August following this very uncomfortable influencer summit where he was screamed at by a Zionist fanatic who's a UK lawyer named Natasha Hausdorff. And basically, if you look at the timeline and the chronology, the letter comes out in May. He also is urging Netanyahu to make his own case for the war on Iran and stating that the American public is against the war and that he doesn't want to be a lobbyist for a war for another country in that letter. The war comes in June. Charlie Kirk is in the White House lobbying against the war. That's a fact. I reported that first, and then J.D. Vance, the vice president of the U.S., corroborated what I reported, as did Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, Max is totally right on this. I'm so glad he talks about this. I thought this was one of the most interesting elements of this letter, which you can read. It's on the New York Post. He says that, he doesn't want the U.S. to get embroiled in a new war. We were promised there were WMDs in Iraq, and that proved to be a lie. I also thought this was really interesting. Israel intelligence missed the boat on October 7th, but we are now asked to trust Israeli intelligence 100% that Iran is on the cusp of acquiring nuclear weapons. It's hard to highlight that for some reason, but that's what he's saying there. So this is kind of a blue-pilled view of October 7th. This is if you believe they missed the boat. I think there's a lot of evidence that they allowed October 7th to happen. Netanyahu was going to go down under fraud and corruption charges, and Egypt tipped Israel off to this attack 3 days in advance, widely reported. Mossad knew about such an attack as much as a year in advance. That's been widely reported too. So he's saying, but you do see the hypocrisy. We're asked to trust Israeli intelligence on Iran on the cusp of nuclear weapons. We've been hearing that for 30 years. Netanyahu's been calling for that. And he says right now it seems like Israel is primarily relying on Americans to make the case for attacking Iranian nuclear sites on behalf of Israel. So this is not Ben Shapiro. This is not Mark Levin. This is someone that really questions the propaganda factory when it came to Iran and how we always needed a regime change there on behalf of Israel. But hey, we're not going to make the case. We want you, our surrogates in the U.S., to make the case. And Max is right. He does talk about that. He explains frustration for Israel depending on subcontractors like himself in the U.S. to make their case for him.
Then July, the Student Action Summit of TPUSA in Florida, where Tucker Carlson lashes out at Bill Ackman, everyone from him to Megyn Kelly to Rob Schneider, the comedian, calls Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad agent and says the president needs to tell the public the truth, which made Trump very uncomfortable as well as Israel. And they have this debate about the Gaza genocide with comic Dave Smith, an anti-Zionist Jew, on stage. You're not supposed to debate this. So Charlie Kirk he's not doing what his donors want. His donors want total loyalty to Israel, and they want the influential Gentiles to make the case for the self-proclaimed Jewish state in the U.S. He's not doing it anymore. Then the Influencer Summit in August. A day after that summit, he goes on former Fox News host the show of former Fox News host Megyn Kelly, and complains about stakeholders and funders who are bossing him around, and complains, I have less ability to criticize Israel than Israelis do. So it's very clear there's a difference in what happened between August and May with Charlie Kirk. And then
yeah, I agree with Max on this. We've talked about these incidents. He clearly expressed a lot of frustrations in that interview with Megyn Kelly, and at the same time repeating some Hasbara propaganda. But Max is right about this. I think he really nailed it there, as he said, they don't want to debate on these Israeli issues from within Turning Point USA. And that's what happened between Josh Hammer and Dave Smith, with Dave Smith getting more applause, by the way, or Tucker Carlson up there talking about how Epstein might be a Mossad asset. And it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. They don't want to debate. They want Hasbara. And I pointed that out in my other video about Dave Smith's, take on this too.
As I reported, he lost one of his biggest, if not his absolute biggest donor a month later right before his death, Robert Shillman, who is not just an anti-Palestinian Likudnik billionaire money man in the United States, he's an anti-Islam activist. He funds Tommy Robinson to wage a race war in the UK. He's funding Laura Loomer, or he has funded Laura Loomer. He funded Geert Wilders, the politician in the Netherlands who wants to ban the Quran. This is like an extreme figure. And he actually, according to my sources, and haven't heard anything from Robert Shillman, demanded that a plaque that was going to be erected inside TPUSA headquarters in Phoenix not go up in his name, took the money away. I mean, we're talking about over $6 million here that he has allegedly contributed. So by the end, as I also revealed, there were these Zoom calls that Charlie Kirk had to call into constantly, where he would meet with a consortium of 10 or so Netanyahu cutouts in the US. One of them was Sean McGuire from Sequoia Capital, who I think helped coordinate Elon's visit to Israel. Fanatical Zionist, said Zoran Mamdani comes from a culture of deception. Joshua Hammer from Newsweek, he's an editor who called for, on October 8th, 2023, called for Gaza to be razed to the ground and turned into a football stadium. And Bill Ackman. Then there was this rabbi, an American rabbi who now lives in an Israeli settlement, Pesach Wolicki, who was basically Charlie Kirk's personal Israeli handler, and said that he was speaking to him on an almost daily basis. Charlie Kirk was pushing back, and that they were trying to establish a WhatsApp group so they could basically, instead of speaking to him daily, speak to him minute after minute about what to say on his upcoming tour. And they were really worried about his upcoming tour because these Netanyahu cutouts believed that Charlie Kirk would be besieged by students, conservative students, asking him uncomfortable questions about the U.S.-Israeli relationship. And they wanted him to defend Israel, and they didn't think he was going to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that is what he pointed out in this letter. He was being asked all these things over and over by young students. And how does he handle that? How does he handle these questions? You know, he did have responses to some of these things if you watch his interviews, but he wanted more. He wanted more talking points fed to him, and he wanted more Israeli presence in that debate. You know, Max is right about the high-level pressure campaign against Charlie Kirk, too. In his Gray Zone articles, he writes about this and the fact that Israel is essentially buying off some of these influencers to make videos for as much as $7,000, by the way, to promote Israel. And this was a mounting pressure campaign against him that, you know, in his first piece at the Gray Zone, he said this left him frightened, and it's not loading here, but he said that this left him frightened when there was so much pushback from some of the wealthy donors, including Robert Shillman that Max just talked about. So yeah, this is on point.
So Netanyahu could not credibly claim Charlie Kirk's legacy as he was shifting. And my understanding, based on what Candace publicly said, is that she was having conversations with Charlie Kirk towards the end about his transformation. And I'm hoping that she will come out with more. But this letter was an obvious exercise in damage control. And anyone who's, you know, on the, you know, anti-Zionist side who believes that that letter shows that Charlie Kirk was just this pro-Israel fanatic and doesn't understand the real role he was playing and what it says about the larger role of political operatives who are basically relying on this Zionist billionaire donor class in the US, is playing Netanyahu's game, advancing his game.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Max is right. This does not read of a letter from Ben Shapiro, someone with unwavering, unquestionable support for Israel, clearly, especially in terms of the Iran war and the Iran section, which is point 6 in this letter. And, you know, at the same time, it does say that he has a deep love for Israel. And he puts here, he thinks he defends Israel more in public than his own government. I think that'd be hard to do. I think our government does a pretty good job of defending Israel, if you ask me, to its detriment, to our detriment, the U.S. taxpayer, by the way. But I think that is right. But that is what this letter says. And look, Max, I think, has the right take here. This is being twisted by the Zionists to show that Charlie Kirk was super pro-Israel. But if you read this letter, man, it does not read like that. That's not to say I think this letter is indicative of a turn toward Israel, which is why, or against Israel, which is why I think Max's point too is pretty good. That, hey, what happened between this letter, supposedly on May 2nd, and in August, there was even more frustration voiced from him. You can see that on that Megyn Kelly interview, especially. So I think Max has the right idea here. This is being twisted by two sides. And I can't wait to see what Candace Owens has to say about this, because she has said, you know, that there's evidence that Charlie Kirk had abandoned the pro-Israel line completely 48 hours before he took a bullet in the throat. Now, she hasn't specified that, but she's called on Turning Point USA to confirm or deny that, to say whether she's lying or not. I hope she presents what she's talking about as evidence, rather than just floating this, you know, above all our heads, and more comes out about that. But she says, hey, answer to this. She seems to have, you know, information that we don't have on that yet.
These are the death pangs. It's sort of the death rattle of a multi-billion-dollar Hasbara complex. And, you know, in Washington, D.C., where I am, the city is now filled with these billboard trucks showing images of frightened people on October 7th and atrocities on October 7th. Many of them actually committed by the Israeli military against their own citizens. They're just everywhere in DC. I mean, there are like dozens of these trucks. Who's paying for it? So they're losing. And Charlie Kirk was really one of the most clear symbols of Israel's propaganda defeat, which is why they're spinning it and doing so much damage control.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. You know, the Zionist influence over young conservatives is slipping away from their fingertips. They can see it. We know it's happening. They know it's happening. Their desperation is clear. In response to it, the pressure campaign against Charlie Kirk was making that clear. We know from Max's reporting, citing those unnamed sources that were close to Kirk, but also corroboration from some of his closest friends and the highest profile conservative influencers in the country, like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, on some of these specifics. That is true. The Israel lobby is losing its stranglehold, not over the government so far, unfortunately. It's losing its stranglehold over young conservatives and young conservative organizations. And I don't think they're getting it back. Man, I think this debate is over, and it is a generational and demographic difference from older generations, generally speaking, but I don't think they're going to get it back. Now, will that manifest into political changes in the U.S.? I don't think so. Not for at least 10 years or so, maybe. Definitely not in 2028. The president that is going to be, the presidential nominees are going to be extremely pro-Zionist in 2028. They'll ensure that in both parties, of course, because there's an Israel first mentality that's, you know, part of the uniparty, part of the party establishment in both mainstream political parties in the U.S. But I think Max hit the nail on the head here, man. This letter doesn't come off as lionizing Israel and being Israel first at all costs, you know, like Netanyahu tried to basically purport and just kind of ignore the rest of it. And it doesn't show that he completely discarded Israel, said, you know, they were conducting a genocide, saying that, you know, Israel's twisted. I don't like the Israeli government. None of that was true, too. This is a nuanced view. I get that. It's not as sexy as saying either of those two things. But I think that's where Charlie was at. He was wrestling with these issues. And to the extent he wrestled with them even more after this, until his death, I think it's pretty clear, too. I think that came out in the Megyn Kelly interview. So I think Max is right. I do want to hear from you, though. Let me know down below. Is Max Blumenthal right? Does this show much more complexities than Charlie Kirk admitting a deep love for Israel? Or does this show him rigidly clinging to Israel first? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Dialogue Works. Excellent conversation. Great channel, by the way. Dialogue Works is awesome. Really appreciate him for covering this and interviewing Max. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support my channel. And in return for that, I will give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. Those are the members only videos. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.